The US government has warned the Solomon Islands it will respond accordingly if its security agreement with China leads to a Chinese military presence in the Pacific. A US delegation is currently visiting the island where they are meeting with government officials over concerns the deal could help China gain ground in the Indo-Pacific. The Biden administration has released a statement saying it has assurances from the Solomon Islands Prime Minister there would be no long-term Chinese presence on the islands. The White House has also committed to expedite the reopening of its embassy in Honiara. Let's head to the United States now, and joining me live is Aiden Smith, Senior Advisor at Data for Progress. Huge story, this one, in the Solomon Islands, Aiden.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, just wanted to thank you for having me on again, as always. And regarding this story, I think that the first thing to note is that U.S. media has been generally pretty quiet about this story. I know that in Australia, this has been a top news story, and rightfully so, since about March when the initial details first leaked. But, regardless, this is understandably a very serious issue for lawmakers in both DC, Canberra, and also the New Zealand government. This is looking at a potential wide strategic recalibration in the Indo-Pacific, a region that is obviously more vital than ever in international affairs. And yeah, when seeing that the Biden administration responded, this does insinuate that, DC is still very much serious about reasserting its influence abroad. And I think that this is also seen elsewhere. Another story that's related is that after a couple of years, when it was first announced and then abandoned, it actually looks like the Russian military might go forward with building a base in Port Sudan in the Republic of Sudan. And that's something that also concerns DC policymakers. So, altogether, this does just show that the days of US hegemony that went unquestioned since about the 90s is basically over, and that lawmakers are very serious about, recalibrating US strategic interests going forward.
Well, we're in the middle of an election campaign, and one of the big points from the opposition at the moment is having a go at the current administration, the Morrison government, and saying that they sat on their hands, so to speak, with the Solomon Islands and they've dropped the ball. What would be the American lens on that? Because obviously Joe Biden and the US administration rely heavily on Australia and its involvement in the Pacific.
Absolutely. And I think it's really worth considering that it really cannot be stressed enough that Australia is such a vital US partner in the region. It obviously has been for more than a century, but especially since the early 2010s, the Pacific has really become the focal point for international strategic efforts that the US is eyeing. That Australia is more vital a partner than ever. And when you're considering what's going on in the election campaign, obviously my vantage point is as someone who has just casually followed along. I do not know how Labor would react differently if it was in government. From my understanding, the US-Australia partnership looks very strong going forward, regardless of which party ends up winning a majority.
It is interesting, though, isn't it, how different it would be, the lens internationally from the US, if Donald Trump had been re-elected.
Absolutely. And, obviously during his presidency, one of the focal points of media controversy and just media coverage in general was the revelations by intelligence agencies about the Russian government's interference in the 2016 election. So naturally, if you wonder how that would go about, I can't really begin to even speculate on the ramifications. Obviously, something, people call it the butterfly effect, how just one minor event changing can change everything else. If, Trump won in November of 2020 re-election, plenty of world affairs would have been drastically altered. But yeah, I do think it's worth considering, especially since Trump does look like possibly the odds-on favorite in the 2024 election.
What about the Ukraine, the US to provide more than 800 million USD in aid, US dollars in aid, going forward? Is there a feel from the government as to how that war is going, when it might end, and how it would end?
Yeah, so I also saw the announcement from the administration that they're looking to send, I think it was 800 million, as you said. And, naturally, Biden was very early on during this pretty open about I think he even used Twitter to say that any direct confrontation between the US and Russia would lead to World War III. They're both nuclear states. And, that kind of went against longstanding strategic ambiguity on the topic. But actually, a lot of people, both liberal and conservative, actually thought that that was a good thing to say openly, just so that there will be no misunderstanding on either side that could lead to a horrifying escalation between two nuclear powers. From my understanding, the administration and also allies abroad in both Europe, Australia, and New Zealand are seeing that the best way going forward is to continue engagement with Ukrainian government. You see leaders like Boris Johnson in the UK actually going over to Ukraine. And I believe that Blinken and Austin, both US cabinet members, are also looking to go themselves. And that wasn't really even a possibility in March. But now it looks like they want to assure Ukrainian allies that they do have are 100% willing to provide financial support as they beat off this unfathomable, horrific war of aggression from this monstrous dictator.
Absolutely, Aiden. Thank you so much. We look forward to catching up with you on the program again soon.
Thank you so much.